Well, hello and welcome to episode 97 of the Plain Accounts webcast series. Every week we dive into at least the gospel lection for this upcoming Sunday. This coming Sunday is a little tricky because the Revised Common Lectionary provides two passages, of one on Passion Sunday and another on Palm Sunday. Palm Sunday will give you a gospel and an epistle, or I'm sorry, a gospel and a psalm for that sort of service, and then you have the Passion narrative, including all four passages as normal. And the reason behind this is many liturgical worshiping communities have multiple services on Palm Sunday. They'll start with the Triumphal Entry and then move to the Passion narrative to prepare us for Holy Week. So you really do have your full play. Some churches will do Palm Sunday on Sunday morning and then have an evening service that they focus on the Passion, creating an open door. It's great if you have Stations of the Cross, because then you can talk about the Stations of the Cross as you focus on the Passion narrative. And so the lectionary really does provide a lot of doorways to enter into this next week. Today we're going to be talking predominantly about the Palm Sunday passage, Mark 11, 1 through 11. And I'm joined today by our commentator, Scott Savage. Scott, thanks a lot for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Any updates for our audience and what's going on in your life and ministry?
Oh, probably since the last time we talked, it's raining in California.
Oh boy.
Other than that, nothing too different.
Okay.
Still doing the hard work of the Lord in Southern California.
Well, it's difficult no matter where you minister, but I feel like, I don't know, they say out west is best, but sometimes for presenting the gospel, it's really difficult.
Indeed.
Sometimes you long for the Bible Belt, I guess. Who knows? Well, thanks for making time for our podcast today, and really appreciate your writing. For those of you who are listening, be sure to read Scott's commentary and all the rest of the wonderful commentaries available to us this week. We're going to look at a couple of questions about what the triumphal entry into Jerusalem signifies and what sort of things we can sort of learn from this context and bring to our people this Sunday. I'm going to read Mark 11, 1 through 11 from the Common English Bible, and it reads like this. When Jesus and his followers approached Jerusalem, they came to Bethphage and Bethany at the Mount of Olives. Jesus gave two disciples a task, saying to them, "Go into the village over there. As soon as you enter it, you will find tied up there a colt that no one has ridden. Unite it and bring it here. If anyone says to you, why are you doing this? Say, its master needs it, and he will send it back right away." They went and found a colt tied to a gate outside the street, and they untied it. Some people standing around said to them, "What are you doing, untying that colt?" They told them just what Jesus said, and they left them alone. They brought the colt to Jesus and threw their coats upon it, and he sat on it. Many people spread out their clothes on the road, while others spread branches cut from the field. Those in front of him and those following were shouting, "Hosanna! Blessed on the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessings on the coming kingdom of our ancestor David. Hosanna in the highest." Jesus entered Jerusalem and went into the temple. After he looked around at everything, because it was already late in the evening, he returned to Bethany with the 12. The written word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Thanks be to God. So as soon as we enter this, we kind of get this fulfillment of the prophecy that we heard about in, is it Zechariah that talks about
the
Mount of Olives?
14, I think.
Yeah,
14:4.
And so why would Mark start chapter 11 out with that? What's that supposed to shape our minds or our imaginations as we read through? Like, what does the Mount of Olives sort of signify?
Yeah. In Zechariah, it signified the location that the Messiah would come from.
Okay.
You would see the Messiah on the Mount of Olives, coming into Jerusalem to do what the Messiah does, to liberate and save and free and redeem. And In particular, I think important to this passage, the Messiah would come and restore worship. And so it's a cue, right? Mark's saying that's what this moment is. But it doesn't, I mean, at least what I try to do is even draw that out a little bit. It doesn't end there because it ends on the cross. That moment's actually a different moment than what they had expected. But it's almost like he wants the readers to have their ears cued to that. Like, well, what we're watching is now the Messiah. But when Jesus enters, he doesn't act like the Messiah that they had expected. So,
wow, and I guess that is the prudent place to start if he's wanting the readers to understand really who this person is as Jesus Christ coming in to liberate not only Jerusalem but the world. And then they move on, and you hear this really kind of odd command from Jesus to his disciples about this untying the colt. I know last year I said, it would be a misread if we use this for big screen TVs at our local department store. Like, well, the Lord really needs this, and it takes it on. But
although I would love to see people try, that would make for good television.
Best Buy does with that. But what are we supposed to? What's the takeaway from that? That's also a fulfillment of a prophecy, if I'm remembering right.
Yeah, I often just kind of receive those moments as a reader. I don't know that I have too much to add to that, other than the fact that there's always those questions about whether or not Jesus knew what was happening and the extent that he knew. The synoptics portray Jesus. I mean, this is one of those passages that make him seem like he is more aware of what's going on than other passages.
Right.
Whereas John's gospel is Jesus just completely and utterly aware of everything that's happening.
Right.
As being the divine one,
Yeah. And the differences also show themselves in different accounts, where one triumphal entry has a donkey.
Right.
This one's really clear as a colt. And I think Matthew, if I'm remembering right, talks about a colt and a donkey, where it's side by side as he's entering into Jerusalem. So there's some different starting points there of interpreting and looking at the story for the gospel writers.
Yeah, which I also, if you're going to bring palm branches in, bring the colt and the donkey, and you as the pastor should ride in on both of them.
That would be
to really demonstrate the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. The sights and the smells.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, and that you bring up another good point about the palm fronds. We use palm fronds, but here it says branches. And with Mark showing Jesus cursing the fig tree, and his whole ministry is this cataclysmic division between the kingdom of evil and the kingdom of God. You said something before the podcast about how, what if they were laying fig branches here, on the ground instead of palm fronds like we use? What significance would that mean? Especially with the stark political symbol that fig trees represent for Israel. Laying that down would say, you really are the liberator, the political leader we desire. We're giving this symbol over to you. It'd be like laying down pictures of bald eagles for, a president that we really, admire, or waving the flag. I mean, that would be as charged as laying down a fig tree of a leader coming into the political capital of their nation.
Right.
And you mentioned as well, along with that, about the clothes and the coats that are laid down. Could you talk a bit more about what that might signify?
Yeah. Well, before I get to the coats, the branches and the cursing of the fig tree, like you said, I heard one pastor very controversially, I think, and probably right, say that cursing the fig tree, the comparison of that would have been like cursing the flag. When Jesus does that, he's not just creating a an anecdote.
Right.
The temple is like the fig tree now.
Right.
The fig tree represented something.
Right.
Centuries, a couple hundred years at least, dating back to the Jews, the Maccabee Revolution, this new like sort of era of the Messiah and political revolution, and they held their own with their capital for a moment, but they're always being threatened by Rome or Greece, whoever it was, to lose it, and so the symbol of the fig tree becomes important about their nationhood and them as a people. And then Jesus curses it and says the temple's like that, and so I don't know what they're laying down here, but they're laying branches down. You have to wonder, are they laying branches down because Jesus is the fulfillment of those branches, the way they expected a Messiah to be, or are they laying them down because they're giving them up?
Right.
And I think there's a lot of exploration there as a pastor to consider. I think the giving up idea might work with the coats idea, in the sense that I didn't quote it. I didn't put a source in there. So if one of the listeners or readers can offer it. I want to say I heard this from a pastor who got it from Ray Vanderlaan, this idea about the coats, where your coat in the desert, was part of your livelihood, protected you from the sun, it guarded you from the sand, it was something to sleep on or under. If you were outside, it was your life source in some ways. So to lay down their coats on the road, in some sense, would have been this gesture of vulnerability. That they're giving it all up, putting it all on the line for Jesus. Whether or not they even get it right, that's still a question we have to address. But that's a vulnerable move.
It really is. And so I think that's the perfect doorway to talk about really the crux of this passage, because we hear those who brought these branches. We heard those who are laying down these coats. We hear them say some very powerful phrases about who they believe Jesus to be. Hosanna in the highest. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the one who comes to bring the kingdom of our ancestor David. Blessed is the coming kingdom. So you have these very incredible phrases said, which, if you took them at face value, really seems to signify that they get it, right? But it's a powerful insight in your commentary about that phrase, especially blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Could you talk a bit about what you said about that phrase being kind of benign in that culture?
Yeah. I don't even know if I put the source. Maybe I did. It's this idea. Kent Brower's or Eugene Boring's commentary. It's just this idea that it seems, according to the scholars, this phrase had become something that was sort of you said all the time to people as they were coming and going from the feasts. Maybe the priest would stand at the temple door and say it to passersby. You get the sense that it became sort of meaningless, and so when Jesus shows up, it's not the priest saying it to the people as they come in. It's like they're saying it to the priest, or really David, the king, as he's coming in. So like they remember it, but they flip it. It also fits. I didn't say this here too, but there's this idea too that they're singing when they come up to Jerusalem to worship. They sing the Psalms of Ascent as they approach the city, and that maybe it fits in with this deeper sort of singing context. These words that started like they knew what they were talking about now, in reference to Jesus.
Wow.
Who had positioned himself on the Mount of Olives. Like all that stuff comes together.
Right.
So,
wow. Well, just like with anything, I think all of this needs to be taken in context with the rest of the events that happen this Holy Week, where they will go along with what they believe Jesus has come to be, all the way up until he's not the Messiah that they want. And as you has talked about before in your commentary, you talked about how Jesus kind of enters Jerusalem twice. One where he's coming in to be kind of check out the temple. He turns around and goes right back to Bethany. But the second time he comes in, he's being led in as a perpetrator against Rome. There's just some really powerful images there. Could you kind of break apart what you intended by that comparison?
Yeah, and really, this is kind of a new line of thinking for me. And this was what no one knows is my emails to you guys changing out my commentary language, because he actually comes to the temple after this Mark 11 more than twice. It's a few times he enters in and out. But I wanted to juxtapose this first one with the last one. That's what I was trying to do. Because I think he goes back and they have conversations, and then he leaves again to the Mount of Olives, and then he comes back and then he leaves. First of all, I will say I'm pretty sold now on always referring to this as the so-called triumphal entry of Jesus.
Especially in Mark, or just overall?
Let's say Mark. I don't know. It just, I mean, yeah, why not? Like, it's just, there's nothing triumphant about it. And maybe Mark actually sets the tone for that, because this is what I was getting at. You know, when he arrives this time the way a Messiah would. He positions himself in the right place. He's on it's not a war horse, but, like, what Sharon Dowd's commentary taught me was, Mark is setting up Jesus as the warrior king, but it's subverted all along the way. But so the warrior king would ride into Jerusalem, and if that was the city you just conquered, you would go to the temple and make the sacrifice to your God, sort of a territorial claim, Well, Jesus doesn't do that. He goes to the temple and leaves. So he's not even claiming the temple. Like, nothing about it is normal in terms of what they would have expected from the culture. And so when he leaves again, and then the last time when he enters the way somebody who was about to be rejected and suffer and die, the way Mark 8 says, would enter as a perpetrator against Rome and against the Jews. He is arrested in Gethsemane, which is outside the city, and is marched in. And I just think it's a powerful image to think of that entry as, I mean, it's comparable, it's equating, that's probably an overstatement, but if you think about what James Cone did with the lynching tree, compare it to the cross, like that startles us from thinking the cross says, well, we understand what that means, right? Well, no, it's an execution device. It startles you into thinking about what that would have meant socially for people who are putting people on trees or crosses. Well, Jesus is not entering for the Messiah to enter the way Jesus talks about the Messiah to enter. It would have to be in chains, as one who is arrested, who is just disrupted the social order. And I think, I don't know if I'm confusing last week's message in John, Gotta Love Year B, where they mix you up with John and Mark, where I think it's, part of what, at least in John, you have to correct me here, they really turn against him when he raises Lazarus. Is that John, or is that part in Mark too? When do they start to plot against Jesus in Mark?
Yeah, it was after a miracle, because Mark's whole thrust through his gospel is how he's always contending with the powers of the world. So it would at least make sense that it's in Mark. Yeah.
So that to me was just, I'm trying to find it where he's arrested. Yeah. So there's Gethsemane. He predicts Peter's now. There's the Lord's Supper. He's anointed at Bethany. Yeah, I just to think of his triumphal entry, his real triumphal entry, as coming from Gethsemane,
Yeah.
and him as a perpetrator, I really think is a powerful image that is worth exploring and drawing our connections to. I mean, I don't know how this plays out, but you think about then what it means for you to deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow. And there are braver and more saintly like people than myself who put themselves out there in the world. But the Stringfellow quote that I mentioned, Stringfellow was indicted by the FBI for allegedly harboring Daniel Berrigan after Berrigan had burned the Vietnam draft papers. And so, you think about people who are not afraid to be perpetrators in the world for the right reasons.
Yes, amen. Well, oftentimes I think so much of the confusion over who Jesus came to be and who the people wanted them to be was this confusion over who they saw themselves to be. They didn't see salvation as being something that deeply changed their lives. They almost saw salvation as this mechanical transaction of who's going to be in political power. Like that's true salvation for them. They wanted a Messiah to come and overthrow the evil powers that are and place them in power, when Israel has shown itself all the way throughout history as being the one who oppresses the poor. When they are the ones who are in that power, they were the idiots who asked for a king, who taxed everybody, who completely tore apart their social structure and oppressed the poor. So they still haven't learned their lesson. They just want to be the ones who are in power when the Messiah has come to bring in this kingdom of God, the way in which God desires kingdoms to be operated. And so he's not the king they want. And yet they're proclaiming him as the king they really do believe that he's come to be, which is why they turn on him so abruptly.
Right.
They are completely on the side for him to be executed. And they call back Barabbas, which is an irony because his name means Bar Abba, son of the Father. He's an oppressor of the Roman Empire. He'll come back to the village and make plans for anarchy. He'll do what they want them to do. He's the son of the Father that they actually want, not the actual Son of God. So they play on that theme all throughout this Holy Week of Jesus not fitting the mold that they expect.
Right. It also broadens, we always talk about irony in the Gospel of John. Well, the irony kind of bleeds over into Mark there. I always think the way Jesus saves us and all that we say about that is completely ironic, just the fact that he chose Bartimaeus. Did I say that right? The ironic choosing of Bartimaeus over Jesus.
Yeah.
I also think, to your point too, it's after that crucial conversation where Jesus says the Son of Man must suffer and die in the chapter 9, and then in chapter 10, I think it's 10. They have disciples have the conversation about who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. In chapter 9 and chapter 10, James and John want to sit on his right and his left. And he's like, you don't understand what that means.
Yeah. And I can't imagine what went through their minds when they stood at the cross and saw who was on his right and his left. I guess we really did not know what we were asking,
Yeah.
That was his moment of coming into the power of the kingdom that he had. And who knows how deeply they get it? Who knows if they even thought that while Jesus is in the middle of those two.
Right. And I mean, for us too, I mean, I don't know always like what it looks like to position myself in the way of the cross that way.
Yeah.
To where, regardless of the outcome, you're living in that faithful sort of trajectory.
Well, the powerful question that you end your commentary with, which goes right along with that, is, are we going to be the people who lay our coats and branches down to the perp who's being brought into the city in chains? Are we going to be the ones who call that our Messiah, rather than this triumphal king that we want? Because even his triumphal entry isn't that triumphant. He's riding a baby horse. You know, he's this peasant. He's not followed by the Maccabean army with bloody swords after, you know, driving out the oppressors. He's being followed by teenage fishermen, you know, just like all of these really funky group of people. And it's like, you still don't understand that, you know, imagine the looks on their faces, like, well, where's the weapons? Like, where are your tools to overthrow? When later on he'll say the tool is the cross. Like, the tool is this execution device that they're using. So take it up with me.
Right. And that's the way of discipleship. That's the means by which we put ourselves out there in the world, or however you want to say that, where, you know, that's the hard question, is what are the powers that are at work, and how do you expose them for what they are, and, you know, in a faithful way that doesn't take into regard your own sort of position or status, or you know. And I mean, you know, I started to think, and I don't know if we want to go there for this podcast, but, you know, even what the church, I think you had talked about what counted as a hero a minute ago, and even the things that we prioritize or lift up as good and faithful are often of the sort of same category as the first triumphal entry, and not so much the second. You know, we still prize, you know, big and flashy, and even though we don't, you know, our language can lead or indicate that we're not that interested in those things, you know. But, you know, ask a small church pastor who's struggling, like, they would love a bigger church, or they would love some more resources, or they would love some more things. And, you know what I mean? And I'm not saying resources and people are bad. I know some big churches that are deeply, deeply faithful, and I know some small churches that are deeply, deeply flawed. It crosses the boundaries, but it's the mentality that is that sort of American, individualistic, consumeristic, bigger is better, you know, take over the world kind of thing. And if you're going to do that, it looks like losing. That's the way of the cross.
It's going to look like losing. It's not going to be the one that gets all the flash and pomp and circumstance. It's going to be the hard walk to the cross. And our choice is, are we going to be those disciples who continue to follow that hard road?
Right. I think, so I'm taking that angle in my sermon this week. I'm really trying to explore that perpetrator theme. In doing that, it's funny to look up, like, famous perpetrators in, like, American culture. You know, the especially the celebrities who turn that into a moment. They subvert the moment by using it as media attention. You know what I mean? Of course, you can have some fun with that in a sermon, but you don't. I think the cross, the comparison to Jesus's way of the cross, is that he doesn't just, you know, like one of my professors at seminary would always say, Jesus knew when to go to the cross. Like, there's like he knows what he's doing. He knows how the game's played.
Right.
And when that becomes a moment, you know, I mean, John alludes to it in last week's passage with the Greeks showing up, right? He knows, okay, now's the hour.
Now's the time. Yeah.
Right. So he knows how to play the game, so to speak. And he knows that when he goes now, it's going to be a big moment of him exposing the powers for what they are. Because if he had, I mean, you could just say, if you do it, if you know, blow the media attention, if you blow the moment, you know, then you don't get the coverage. And I hate to use that comparison because I don't know if Jesus was that intentional, but I think he knows what he's doing. And I think he knows that when he goes, it'll be with intention, not just, oh, shoot, like, they got me. But he's like, I'm going and I've done these things and I've set up all this stuff so that when they see me hanging on the cross, it will all make sense.
Right.
You know,
Right.
that takes some intention, I think, for ministry too. Like, what are we setting up? What are the seeds that are being planted, and what are we moving towards? And can we see the big picture, so that if push ever came to shove in our ministries, it's not that the whole house of cards would fall, but it's like everything would then make sense.
Right.
And this beautiful garden would thrive in the midst of what would look like chaos and defeat or whatever, you know. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it really does. That sort of converse reality almost drives the disciples to say, you know, so I've been fostered in a culture that makes me value these things. What is my system of value that God is calling me to, so that I can recognize Jesus as the Messiah he's come to be, not the Messiah I want. The perennial question that you've kept, alluding to is, who is it that you say that I am? How are we answering that question? Because it reveals our system of value. It reveals what we define as correct and what is wrong. And if we're not allowing Jesus to shape our system of values, then we're not going to be able to understand how it is to act in this world according to the kingdom. Because the kingdom is that way of being. It's not our own choosing. So it's really, really important.
Right. It's also what's funny about the movie American Jesus that I allude to or talk about for a minute, just as an example of, another fun moment in a sermon could just be laying it all out there. Like, look how confused we are.
Yeah.
About all of this.
I think this Jesus is. Yeah.
And you don't even have to go into like who's right or wrong.
Right.
Just the fact that the variety is there.
Yeah.
Just it shows that you're like, we need a second look at what this way of the cross means.
Yep.
Getting fleshed out in all kinds of different ways.
Yep, we do. So, but short of coming into the sanctuary on a colt ourselves, as the pastor,
unless you're from Indianapolis,
palm branches at our feet. What are some ways that we could invite our congregations into really grasping that crucial narrative of Palm Sunday?
I mean, gosh, I don't know. In our church, we do the simple thing where we hand the palm branches out, before church. They're not figs, because in California I can get palm branches anywhere. Right. So they're palm branches. And then when we come up for communion, I hopefully have set it up in time or in a way where when people come up, we do intinction. So they walk forward, they receive, and then they lay their palm branch down on the communion table as a gesture of mostly coming from the cloak idea. You're laying your life down. It's a vulnerability thing, but within the context of the dueling kingdoms. Ben, you had talked about, I think you said it before we started recording, about Pharaoh, or not Pharaoh, I guess it's Pharaoh symbolically. Caesar would have been riding in, or one of his nobles, higher ups, would have been riding in on the other side of Jerusalem during Passover.
Right.
Which I just think is a great point. Power is going to show up and try to take control. And so when you lay your palm branch down, you're laying down that power, whatever that is, whatever it would be for you to be greatest in the kingdom of heaven, or to sit on the right or left of Jesus. We all kind of tease that out in our own ways in terms of the things we strive for and the way we do it and how we treat people. And I think when you frame it within the larger, I don't know how many folks not in America listen to this, but in the American context, it's deeply individualistic, it's deeply consumeristic, it's deeply nationalistic. And those three words get thrown around a lot, but we haven't begun to uproot those things from our churches or our lives. They're there, and they're deeply influential. And so the more you can get people to see that when you give up those things, you ride in with Jesus from Gethsemane, not Jesus from the Mount of Olives. And it's more vulnerable that way. It also hurts more, but it's also good.
Yeah, I love that, the way that contrast plays out, and I don't think it's been as clear to me before this point about the point of origin that Jesus comes from. Still a fulfillment of prophecy, and yet the way of God just completely, profoundly shapes that whole narrative. I heard Brian Zand. I don't know if you see or read any of his stuff, but he just recently said, like, you know, what we see in Jesus is what we know about God. It's the fullest picture of God that we can ever know is Jesus Christ. Even if we got it wrong in the past, like, Jesus is the fullest picture of God. And gosh, Israel tripped up in their understanding of God so often, but the way in which we see Jesus operate is truly the heart of God in the world. And I have to believe that. And so it drives me to really understand what I'm hailing as king. Is it what Jesus can do for me? Or is it what Jesus has come to do in the world? And can I be a part of that work? Can work be done in me? And can I lay down all my preconceptions at his feet so that he can then take me up as I take my cross up with Jesus to follow him into that work, that I'm formed by that submission.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think, I mean, it's Lent, right? Our church, at least, we found ourselves doing a lot of like inner heart work, like learning how to like look at ourselves in the light of the crucified God. And I think what you just said there fits right into that, in the sense that you have to learn how to see what's at work in you in order to. Part of what it means to see Jesus clearly is to see yourself in light of him. Right. I think that's what the John passages have been alluding to. When he's lifted up, he will draw people to himself, the light that shines in the darkness, right? So, you have those two Johannine passages preceding this triumphal entry, or so-called triumphal entry story, right? It's all connected in the sense that, do you see who he really is? Or like you said, is it the Messiah we want, or the Messiah? How did you say it? The Messiah we want versus the Messiah we get. Yeah. And part of what it means to see him truly is to see the way that the world, the way John puts it, is at work in us. To see the depth of that brokenness, all of the ways, and I think there's a lot you can just keep drawing off of from those passages, at least in terms of sermon prep, when you have to really tie this home for your parishioners, you can get them into the story and then just keep hammering that point. Like, do you see Jesus for who he is? That's the crucified body that shines the light into the world.
Right.
And that's what the disciples, what the crowd gets. They say all the right things, even if there's still a blurriness to what they're saying. It's right. He's Hosanna. He's the one who comes in the name of the Lord. He's blessed is the coming kingdom of our father David. Hosanna. And like those are right. Yep. But they're for him when he's hanging on the cross.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. Oh, that's so good. I think that's a great final word on for him when he's hanging on the cross. That's perfect. Hey, Scott, thank you so much for spending some time with me today to discuss this, one of my favorite passages for one of my favorite sermons and services of the year. Really appreciate your work on the commentary, and really appreciate what God is doing through you in your ministry context.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate you and Danny, although I've missed him a couple of times these last few conversations, but I love what you guys are doing. I love the questions. I love all of the different avenues that it opens up for how we can get into these texts for our churches, not just, all of the pieces that we can say about the scripture that might be interesting, but how does all this play out in our lives? So it's good.
Well, that's our deep desire to keep providing a needed resource to pastors for the goal of being a servant to them. So thank you so much for your feedback and words. For all those who have listened, be sure to follow us, subscribe to our newsletter, and you'll never miss an update for what's going on in the Plain account. We're looking forward to some exciting changes in the future. We are doing a fun little exercise to get the name of a Plain account out there. We are hoping to reach 1,000 likes by our 100th episode. And as you can see, we're on episode 97. So if you hear, or if you could invite anyone you know who might benefit from the resource to like our Facebook page, we are at around 850 right now. So we're getting close. So if you would invite people to do that, that would be a big help to us to achieve that word of mouth goal. And may you be blessed and peace be with you as you go through this Holy Week. We look forward to being with you for our podcast next week when we look at the Easter text, so we can celebrate the resurrection together. Go in peace this week. Thanks again, Scott.